All right, now I think hopefully we have a nice crew of our audience all signed in. And so I want to welcome everyone to our live stream program and to acknowledge that we are programming today from the traditional territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam, people who have since time immemorial used the process of observation and storytelling in what they do to connect people to science as well as their communities. And so we want to acknowledge that we really are grateful for the opportunity to build that into everything that we're doing with OceanWise and OceanWise education. And so hopefully everyone has their chat open so that they can put in their questions and comments during the program. But I know that you're all really excited to hand it over to Valeria, so I will change this setting here so that you can share your slides in just a moment, and then we'll have it over to you, and I'll be on the line moderating the chat. But feel free to message me. I will be on mute so that the screen stays nice and focused on Valeria and her presentation today. So I think
you are now the presenter. I think that is me. Okay, let's see if we can do this. So there's a little share screen here. Share. Right, and let's put this on presentation mode. How's that? Are you guys seeing my screen? Yeah, great. And I recommend that you put your speakers up. I mean, of course, because you have to hear me, but I will be playing some sounds, and so you'll want your speakers particularly cranked up for that. So yes, oh, and let me just click off that little, there we go. I have been with OceanWise since 2002, and it was since then that I've been looking at acoustic communication in beluga whales. Beluga whales are a profoundly acoustic species, and I'm going to tell you all about that today. Oh, the slides are not advancing. Let's see, not happening. How is for you? Is it for you? Are the slides advancing at all? No. Okay. Not happening here either.
Well, I do find that the trick that seems to work best for me is to just exit presentation mode and maybe try it again. It's the old turn it off and turn it back on again.
Okay. Yeah, my cursor is frozen. I am unable to access anything in Cisco WebEx. I'm sorry, everybody that is here trying to watch this, but yes, I don't have a cursor to work with. I don't know if you want to take control again and give it to me again, perhaps. That might be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try a few different things here. Otherwise, for all of our audience, again, if you'd like to start putting in some questions or thoughts for Valeria, you're more than welcome to put that into the chat for the Q&A.
Okay, let's see this. Yeah, no, my cursor, I don't know if you can see it, but it just does, it won't work. Yeah.
And if you hit escape, it's not closing it out of the presentation.
Oh, yeah. It's as if I just did, I no longer have control of my computer. That's what seems to be happening here. Yeah. And it's strange because I've been able to do, to share my screen and do presentations without a problem on WebEx up until this minute. Murphy's
always something new.
Yeah. Do you wanna? Are you able to take control and then give it back?
I can give you the host ability to see if that changes things. But you are still selected as the presenter for the presentation. If you do want to try signing out of WebEx and signing back in, then I will continue the conversation with our audience until you
Sounds
get
good.
back.
Sounds good. No, not even that is working. It's really, my computer has lost all ability to function.
Well, the good news is that we can still hear you and see you. So we could again give your computer a moment to catch up. Hopefully, I think even Jessica, who was joining us last week, had to do a pretty hard reset on her computer. It seemed a little bit overwhelmed. But so you're welcome to try and sign out, kind of, do a hard turn off on your computer and join us again. Or
okay, that will, it's up to you guys. I mean, whatever the audience would be happy with, I'm happy to stay here and just answer questions and we can just have a conversation about these. Or I can do a reset of the computer, but that'll take a good 5 minutes. So I don't know what the audience feels about these.
Okay, so we're over to you, audience. If you want to put in the chat, do you have a few minutes for a hard reboot and listening to me? Or we'd love to hear your questions for Valeria as well. I know one of the kind of first questions that is often asked that we love to find out from Valeria is, what is the reason? How did you come to be a marine biologist?
You know, my route for becoming a marine biologist is not very usual because I didn't start by studying marine biology. I actually studied behavioral ecology. I did my undergraduate work on coyotes behavior in Yellowstone National Park, and I did my master's on red fox social behavior around the Peterborough area near Trent University in farmlands in southern Ontario. And it was when I decided to do a PhD that I realized I was so absolutely fascinated by social behavior, communication, and intelligence of social animals, and what best animals to study these than cetaceans, than whales and dolphins. So I contacted Lance Barrett Leonard, the director of our Marine Mammal Research Lab, and he took me on as a PhD student. So that's basically what happened. So my degree is in behavioral ecology, which means what do animals, how do animals act in their natural, usually in their natural environments, and why they have evolved particular behaviors.
Wonderful. So seeing a few questions popping into the chat. I did just reduce your screen share, so I managed to do that on my end. So now they can see your full image, which is also wonderful. Great. And we can always try resetting the presenter mode in just a moment. But I was
able to end, whatever you did, that worked. I have control of my computer again now, so we could conceivably try it again.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to share another question with you for you to be answering while we just change the presenter mode over again. So I know this is probably leading into one of your first slides, but what do you study currently? Can you tell us a little bit more about your area of study?
Yeah, so I study beluga communication and a variety of different angles that I'll hopefully be able to tell you all about if I get this presentation running. And I also look at the impacts of underwater noise on their ability to communicate efficiently.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully we get to see and hear some of that amazing presentation. So I have just tried to reset that function for you. So if you want to click the little screen share bottom image at the bottom, we'll see how we do today.
Sure, let's see. All right, let's try this again. Share. Okay, how is that? Am I sharing the
You are
slide?
sharing.
Okay, let's see now. Working. So
wonderful.
You're listening to beluga whales. Hopefully you are listening to beluga whales on your end. I'm sure listening to them on my end. And beluga whales are called the sea canaries. And how they use sound is a really important aspect of their ecology. They're profoundly acoustic animals. So since 2002, I've been looking at what is the function of beluga calls, how and when these calls are used, and also how do they develop? Are little calves born knowing all of these hundreds of different calls or not? So here's a little bit of a breakdown of the calls that I was able to identify way back then between 2002 and 2006 by recording 6 belugas at the Vancouver Aquarium. They, of course, make many more calls than this. This is just a sample. And what you're looking at are called spectrograms, which are visual representations of sound with frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. Basically, when biologists study sounds, they need to look at them because we're a much more visual species than we are acoustic. So you'll see the difference between all the sounds just visually, and you'll be able to hear them. I'll play you a few. So hopefully you heard that. That's type G. Let me put this a little louder. So here we go. That's the sneeze. That's the scream. That is the reason why they're called sea canaries. They really sound like birds sometimes, and it's a sound that they use very often in association with play. That's another whistle that interestingly is related to aggressive events. Same with that kind of whistle. And that kind of, it sounds, I would say, like a creaky door, like a rusty door, or like a chainsaw. I'll play it again for you because I want you to remember it. It is the most important sound that belugas make. Perhaps not the most important, but it's certainly a functionally very important one. And it's called the contact call. And since I've discovered that belugas make these sounds in situations where they need to maintain group cohesion and mother-calf contact, I have not stopped studying this particular sound in all sorts of environmental contexts. The first thing I did was learn how little beluga calves learn this sound and many others. And I did this by following the vocal development of a calf during the first 2 years of life. And I found that it is really similar to the human babbling stage or the bird subsong stage. There is such a thing as beluga babbling stage. They just are like toddlers initially, and slowly they start picking up all the sounds that adults make. And throughout the years, we've also identified contact calls produced by a number of wild beluga populations all around the world. And this includes studies by myself and my research assistant in various areas of the world. And I'm going to show you what these contact calls sound like. They are always broadband, which means they encompass a wide range of frequencies. And sometimes they have a little whistle within human hearing range that you might be able to pick up, and sometimes they do not. In both cases, they're contact calls. So one is called a complex call, sounds like this. And the second one was the simple contact call. So keep that in mind. Now, a number of other cetacean species, especially dolphins, several species of dolphins, have vocal signatures. This is like a little bit of, very much actually, like a name tag that instead of wearing, like we would if we went to a big meeting, they actually announce it. So some cetacean species, like bottlenose dolphins, swim around announcing their own names. And there's preliminary evidence that narwhals, which are very close relatives of belugas, also do that. And so we thought, wow, would these contact calls be vocal signatures for beluga? Maybe each beluga has their own call, you know? How can we study that? And at the time when we started asking this question, I was spending a summer in Cunningham Inlet, which is very far north. It's in the Canadian High Arctic. And this is where the Eastern High Arctic Baffin Bay beluga population, it's one of the estuaries in which the mothers and calves come in every summer for a period of a few weeks. So that little red yurt was my yurt for 4 to 5 weeks every summer. And the ice would retreat. And then we would have this kind of situation with a delta. And belugas would come into the river canals and would get entrapped by the sandbars periodically until the tide would come up again, and then they'd be able to get out and join the larger herd outside of the canal. So I saw repeated entrapments, what I call river entrapments of this kind, and I thought this is such an amazing opportunity to study how the whales communicate in these conditions. Do they make contact calls to try and communicate with the guys outside the canal? So I used a hydrophone. That's in the green is myself deploying the little hydrophone to record that little group. And I also did recordings, and I don't know if you're able to see this video, hopefully you are, but you can see a little tower in the middle of that beluga herd. So I would perch myself on that tower and record these hundreds of beluga that would surround the tower on a daily basis. And I compared the recordings that I got from the free-ranging herd to the recordings I got in the entrapments, during the entrapments. And I found, of course, that the entrapped belugas produced much more frequently contact calls. That's pretty much all they produced. When they were entrapped, they produced contact calls. So it was a great opportunity to study these contact calls. So we flew a drone over each entrapment, and we were able to count the number of animals in each entrapment. We were able to see if there were any newborns in each entrapment. And then we analyzed all of the complex contact calls, so those that have a little whistle at within hearing range in each entrapment. And we created a catalog of complex contact call types for each entrapment. This is just a randomly selected one, entrapment 11, and you can see there were 13 complex contact call types. So they all sound very similar, but they look very different. So contact call 1, if you look at it, CC1, and then look at CC9, you'll see that the various samples, there's 5 samples of each kind, look different from one another, but similar to its own type. And so we gave these sets of contact calls that we recorded in each entrapment to 55 naive judges. And this is a really cool method in biology, in bioacoustics. It's been used for over 20 years because we now know that humans are actually still better than computers at pattern recognition and categorizing, especially categorizing sounds. So when we give these sounds to human judges that know nothing about them, and we ask them, how would you classify these? They come up with the same classifications that we did, and several people and volunteers and staff at the Vancouver Aquarium helped with this study. This is my daughter, by the way. And there was a very high agreement with our classification, so we knew we weren't just pulling it out of a hat. And there was a high correlation between the number of contact calls that we classified and the number of animals, of adults in an entrapment, to the point where if there was just one animal entrapped, there was just one contact call type. So I think that the answer is very likely, these contact calls represent, each contact call might represent the contact call type of each individual or their name. And we published this in Marine Mammal Science in 2018. But of course, this is preliminary evidence. And in science, you have to be very careful with these kinds of things. And we're continuing to study this in the St. Lawrence estuary. It is an endangered population. They're facing all sorts of threats, like pollution and reduced food availability because of climate change and habitat degradation and of course, noise and disturbance. But because it's such a small population that has been so studied, a lot of the individuals are known. They're photo-identified, and they have been for over 30 years. And so, for example, in 2017, we had Neo come by our hydrophones, and he's a male. He was very well known by our partners at GREM, that's the Group for Research and Education in Marine Mammals in Quebec. So we knew he was Neo, we knew there was no one else around, and he started calling and making the call you're gonna hear right now. So we were super excited because the signature part of his contact call was very clear. And we decided we realized that this is a wonderful study to pursue in the St. Lawrence because of the possibility to photo identify the individuals. And we partnered with DFO and GREM to analyze the D tags. Those are temporary tags attached with just suction cups to the belugas. They fall off, they're non-intrusive, but while they're on the beluga, they record the vocalizations that that animal produces. So we're now, my research assistant and I are analyzing data from 2018 and 2019 to verify the signature call hypothesis. So we're super excited about that. And this is really important because it just being able to identify individuals or groups by their calls complements basically any kind of monitoring efforts we have in this endangered population. And speaking about conservation issues surrounding beluga populations, the study of cetacean communication is really intimately related to the issue of underwater noise, which is omnipresent in all our oceans. And of course, belugas or no cetaceans can do that. No cetacean can, cover their ears when they are exposed to noise. We say that underwater noise is a bit like an acoustic smog. It's a little bit as if humans had to walk around in a very smoggy place. Belugas, for instance, that rely on sound for pretty much every aspect of their lives, find communicating and echolocating and finding their way much more difficult when they navigate in acoustic smog. And this can come from a number of sources, including shipping, recreational boats, and oil and gas exploration, naval sonar, you name it. And it has to do with the fact that sound transmits very, very efficiently in water. And so on the one hand, this is why whales can use sound to communicate so efficiently, but on the other hand, it makes noise transmit very well too. And in the St. Lawrence, little calves have been dying since 2008, and we don't know why. Females have been dying. This is associated with postpartum complications since 2010. And we think that these deaths have to do with noise and anthropogenic disturbance, with prey shortage, and with contaminants. So our team at OceanWise and I have been looking at what the impacts of noise may be and how might noise mask mother-calf acoustic communication in the highly industrialized St. Lawrence estuary. And a little bit about communication masking. Basically, this is when the communication space of a call, which is the effective range over which any call can be detected or decoded by another whale, is reduced because of noise. And the consequences of acoustic masking can be quite critical when you're dealing with vocalizations that serve to keep mothers and calves together, for example. And these are contact calls that we know very well. So we explored the reduction in communication space of the signals, the contact calls produced by beluga moms and beluga calves in the St. Lawrence. And I'm not going to go over each one of those factors, but I'll just briefly mention that there are so many issues that you have to be aware of to be able to look into these things. So this study took quite a long time, about 3 years or so to complete. It was conducted in Bay Sainte Marguerite, which is a beluga nursery up the Saguenay River, which is a tributary of the St. Lawrence. And it's a very important area of high residency for females and their calves. And what we found, and again, I will skip all the graphs, and you can ask me questions about methodology if you're interested, but I'll just say that the maximum communication ranges are 10 times larger for adult calls than for newborn calls. So newborn calls, newborns talk very quietly, and their calls can be heard at 10 times less the distance than adults. And in noisy conditions, there's a reduction in that communication space of 53% for newborns. And so there's particularly strong masking effects of noise for the very quiet calls of newborn beluga cats. Their communication range can be reduced to as little as 170 meters in noise, and that for a beluga is a very small space. It means that if beluga mothers and calves separate, it might be quite feasible that the mom might not be able to hear the calf calling. And a little bit about what we're currently doing in the St. Lawrence. So that study is out for submitted for publication, and we're now moving on, and we're looking at whether 3 different beluga communities have different contact call repertoires, which has also conservation implications because it would allow us to monitor them acoustically much more easily. We're monitoring noise levels in various areas of the St. Lawrence, and this is super exciting. It has a little bit to do with the COVID-19 regulations and the fact that the oceans around the world are becoming, or maybe becoming, quieter. And there are a number of research labs doing work on this in various oceans of the world. And my research partners and I in the St. Lawrence are definitely on the path to deploy a few hydrophones in areas where we've worked in the past to be able to compare what the situation is like for the whales. And we're doing a lot of, and will be doing a lot of science outreach from different locations, key land locations on the St. Lawrence estuary to relay sounds and science and video of the belugas to different interpretation centers around Canada in the hope of promoting whale observation from land or from various sites and reduce disturbance. And finally, the third research project is in Churchill, and this unfortunately was going to happen in 2020, but COVID-19 made it so that we might have to postpone it to 2021. It is the Western Hudson Bay population, which is of special concern. The Arctic is really suffering the effects of global warming. There's a lot less ice and a lot more access. The shipping season is longer, and with this, there's more noise. We've been in Churchill since 2017. That was our first season there, and this year was going to be our second season. And we're pairing drones and acoustic technology, recording technology, to understand beluga communication. Basically, to look in more detail at things like the correlation between group activity, group composition, behavior, and noise. And this is something that you can do really beautifully by pairing visuals and sounds. And we're hoping to start building a catalog of all these complex contact calls that can help us identify belugas and their use of habitat, and develop better ways to understand what it is that we're listening when we don't have visual indicators, but we just have acoustic indicators. And of course, we're always looking at the impact of noise in all our sites. So that's a bit of a quick summary of what we've been up to this past few years. And yeah, I would be happy to keep taking questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, one question that popped up several times was when you were talking about getting volunteers to listen to some of the beluga sounds previously. So there's lots of questions about, will that opportunity come up again? Are there any opportunities to volunteer listening to beluga sounds right now?
I am sure that is an opportunity that will come again. My PhD student, Jacqueline Oben, who is going to take the lead on the study of the repertoire of contact calls of beluga female communities. I am sure that once we have enough data on the different sets of contact calls, we will need people to help us with this. It's one of the most widely used techniques. So we're not at the point yet where we need that kind of help, but we will get there fairly soon.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure there are lots of folks that would be eager to raise their hands and participate in something like that. again, for our audience, if you'd like to put any questions for Valeria in the Q&A, and Valeria, if you click on your, if you stop sharing your screen, you'll see it as a bottom menu, or if you mouse over the top, you'll be able to open the chat if you want to kind of read things as they're coming in. But I'm happy to field some questions your way as well. And one of kind of my personal curiosities that I always love to ask during these programs is what's like, you talked a little bit about hydrophones, but maybe for some folks that aren't sure what that is, what kind of technology do you need? How do you actually get all of this information when you're doing your work?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So hydrophones are basically underwater microphones, and they used to be analog. So we needed a hydrophone connected to a tape recorded, connected, to a computer. Now they're digital, which means that you can acquire all of the signals directly into the hydrophone and then into the hydrophone memory, and then once in a while you retrieve these acquired sounds and dump them directly into your computer's digital files. So the technology has improved tremendously. We're able to record sounds that are much more broadband. So we're able to record much higher frequencies than in the past. When I started working with Belugas in 2002, the maximum frequency that I could analyze from my recordings was 22 kilohertz. And now it's about 156 kilohertz, because the technology is just so much better. And this is really important when you're studying an animal that has a hearing range that is huge. They can hear sounds that are probably up to about 150 kilohertz or so, and they produce sounds with acoustic energy at those same frequencies that they can hear. So yes, great technology these days.
That's incredible. I know I'm learning new technology every day and seeing how it's changing. So I can only imagine how beneficial that is when you're doing acoustic work like your research.
Absolutely.
One question that also came in that I thought was great was that little kind of platform that you showed us that you were doing some of the studying for. Kind of how long did you have to stay there? How did you get there and back?
So
How
I think you've seen two different platforms. So one of them was in the high Arctic. This was a very homemade platform that we put together as best we could, and that didn't have any railings. So you would wait. I wore waders or long boots sometimes, and you'd wait till you get low tide, climb up a ladder, and then perch yourself atop the platform and kind of watch the tide, because you had to make sure you'd be able to get out of the tower before the high tide, because you can't swim out of the tower, and the water would come up and surround the tower, and you'd slowly be surrounded by water and whales. So there was a key point to exit the tower, which I failed to follow one time, and I got stuck in the tower for about 8 hours. And this is very tricky when you cannot move. It's like 1 meter by 1 meter, doesn't have any railing. The wind is threatening to pull the tower down. So that was a memorable occasion that was never repeated again. In the St. Lawrence, our tower was a little bit more comfortable. It was taller, it had railings, and it was about 2 meters by 3 meters. So it could fit 3, sometimes 4 of us and all our gear. And we got to that tower paddling a boat. And then we would tie the boat to the tower, and as the tide would rise and the beluga would come closer and closer to the tower, we would spend up to eight hours on that tower on a daily basis, and then we would get out either walking if the tide was low, or paddling if the tide was high.
Wow, that sounds like quite the adventure. I hope you brought snacks with you. That's a long time.
It's essential. You eat all the time on those towers.
And what was the weather that you had to endure? Like whether it was in Churchill or in the St. Lawrence, I imagine it can get pretty cold in those places.
Yeah, so Churchill is a subarctic region, and in the summers, it actually we had fairly warm days. Even though you could see polar bears from the boat and stuff, it wasn't freezing, and you have mosquitoes and all of that. In the high Arctic, which is much farther north than Churchill, it is cold. I mean, it is the kind of cold weather that you wake up in the morning, and if you have a bottle of water, the water froze in your bottle. So definitely sub-zero temperatures often, at least during the Arctic nights, and very windy, very unpredictable weather. And in the St. Lawrence, it's Quebec summer weather. It can be very foggy on the water. It can get very windy, so you not always are able to fly the drone. There's thunderstorms, etc.
Wow, definitely never a dull moment. I'm sure there's lots of people that love belugas. Some of them, as our audience members today, probably thinking, could they stick it out through all of that? That's pretty impressive stuff. So as we're just coming close to the conclusion of our program today, another question that I always like to ask is, what is your advice, if any, that you have for some budding scientists that are in our audiences?
What is the advice that I have? Can you repeat the last?
For sure. Just any advice that you have for kind of budding scientists, people that are thinking of going into these careers.
I will always say this: volunteer. I started out. I knew that I wanted to become a biologist probably since I was 7 or 8 years old. So by the time I graduated from high school, I just knew this is what I wanted to do with my life. So I began writing to people, finding who was doing what I wanted to be doing and writing them to volunteer for them. And if you bug people enough, and I should not be saying this, somebody will take you on. And once you have volunteer positions under your belt, people will eventually hire you under a paid role, and one thing leads to another. It's a very competitive field because it's a very beautiful field. So it is important that you gain experience. Yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. Well, we commented that there might be some future opportunities for volunteering, as well as Oceanwise and the Vancouver Aquarium does have opportunities to sign up for mailing lists for other volunteer positions. So I think that's a great piece of advice for our audience and for people thinking of pursuing a scientific career. One question that just came into our chat was, do you know of any good intern opportunities for high school or college students? And so I'll let you answer first, and then I can probably even throw a few on behalf of Oceanwise.
Yeah, so exactly. More widely in terms of Oceanwise, I'll let Danica answer. For me, in general, we don't take high school students because what we do that has to do with, I mean, unless we're gonna, if it's something simple like where we require naive judges to just go through vocalizations and tell us what category they think those vocalizations fit into, then high school students are great. And we had a few high school volunteers. But for more complex kinds of analysis, even if we did have internships, it would have to be university students because you're dealing with bioacoustics, which is a complicated field. Yeah, yeah. But at this time, we don't have any internship available.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I can say the same thing. A lot of our volunteer recruitment for Oceanwise and the Vancouver Aquarium is currently on hold. But I did just answer with our link on our vanaqua.org page that you can sign up for volunteer opportunity communications, and that could start out for work experience placements with our Youth to See program. And again, if you check out the online oceans page and scroll right to the bottom, you'll see how to join our youth initiative program, Youth to Sea. And there's always some great opportunities to get started in volunteering with different groups that way. And if you're a little bit older, more kind of college age, we also have our Ocean Bridge Direct Action program that I believe their deadline just got extended for applying to join for a 3-month field study that they're recruiting some volunteers and interns for. So lots of opportunities, hopefully, in the near future. So we are now nearing the end of our program. So I really want to thank Valeria for sharing her work, and I'm constantly in awe of all of the stories that you tell from your research, and I think it was really inspiring, and maybe we'll leave our audience with some great things to dream about doing in the near future.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everybody that took the time to listen. Great questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And so just before we sign off, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. And if you like joining us for programs like this, as you've probably heard in media and in different places, that the Vancouver Aquarium and Oceanwise is looking for your support. So by joining these programs, by sharing with your friends and family the opportunity to tune in and join us or share on social media, that's a wonderful way to help support us. If you are able to do more, we have lots of donation and initiative opportunities that you can join, including the Safety First White Caps and Vancouver Aquarium Face Mask initiative that you can find out more information about right at vanaqua.org. And every little bit counts, particularly just sharing our work with your friends and family. And we have more programs coming out every day. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock, we have our next live stream with our wet lab biologist. So I hope that we see you all again soon. Okay, so we'll give you a nice wave.
Bye, everybody.
Have a lovely afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.